to clarify, I'm Ron Magani, first speaker for Affirmative, and we're first speaking half. I'm going to assume our opponents already.
Yeah.
Alright, cool. Reaffirm. Contention 1 is resilience. There are two scenarios. First is climate change. Climate change is worsening. The most recent studies confirm we're on the brink of irreversibility and the next 20 years are key, a VD 211. New studies indicate we crossed the key threshold earlier than expected. The odds of 24 being the first year of a 20-year period reaching the warming level were virtually certain. Beyond this, critical tipping points would be breached, leading to irreversible consequences. Climate change causes extinction, multiple internal links, no adaptability, V19. CC causes extinction due to non-linearity, positive feedbacks, and tipping points. Abrupt ice sheet collapse cause rapid sea rise, drying forests, increased fires, and higher ocean temps release methane. There are other threats to the adaptability limit due to heat stress. Even modest warming exposes large fractions of the population to unprecedented heat stress, making extinction likely. Second is the economy. A recession is coming by next year, and Trump guarantees it. Roach 326. Trump's MAGA movement has driven a wedge between the US and Europe. This will cast a lasting shadow over econ performance in the US, where asset values and consumer confidence have been shaken. Uncertainty is likely to freeze the economy, and Trump's tariff escalation will undermine China's export-led growth, especially problematic given the weakness of China's domestic demand. Europe remains saddled with anemic growth compounded by mounting trade pressures. The baseline of 3.3% world growth by the IMF is far too sanguine. While there may be front-loading growth early this year, downside risks will progressively build. The added cost and price pressures are likely to tip the scale towards global stagflation. Trump is a full-blown crisis. That will cause widespread poverty, Shearholzel 9. The poverty rate increased to 13.2%, and 96 million people were living below the poverty threshold. Affirming solves both. Public action creates certainty to ensure private sector investment in nuclear energy, IEA 116. SMRs draw increasing interest from the private sector. Success hinges on the ability to bring down costs. Ensuring the predictability of future cash flows is key to bringing down costs and attracting private capital. Governments must give the private sector confidence to invest. Domestic action facilitates international projects and energy exports, Lorenzini 37. Trump and Biden supported nuclear energy domestically, which exports U.S. tech and expertise. Building on domestic advances will facilitate investments in multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects outside of the U.S. and bolster energy exports from the domestic nuclear energy industry. Nuclear energy is key to climate solvency and better than alternatives. It also fosters economic resilience, WNA 24. Progress is contingent upon a sustainable supply of energy for reducing GHGs. The energy sector is responsible for 3/4 of all emissions, and transforming it is the most important step to combat climate change. Nuclear power emits 12 grams of CO2 per kilowatt-hour, similar to wind and lower than all types of solar. It requires less land than any other source. A large plant can provide electricity for 5 million people from just 2 square kilometers. The land use of biomass, hydro, wind, and solar are 3 orders of magnitude greater than nuclear. Investment spills over into other sectors. A nuclear power plant requires a complex supply chain, creating employment opportunities. For every 1 year invested, nuclear generates 4 in GDP. Uranium extends the resource base and allows use for other resources where they are most effective. Uranium is distributed among a wide range of diverse countries and reduces the risk of disruptions experienced during oil and gas crises. Contention 2 is nuclear submarines. Chinese tensions are rising due to their slowing economy. They're leading in the Navy, Bodine 35. China will increase its defense budget 7.2%. It has the world's largest navy. Tensions with the US, Taiwan, Japan, and neighbors who have overlapping claims are driving spending. Faced with slower growth, China will prioritize key goals. Xi attempted major reforms and removed senior military leaders. Unfortunately, the US is struggling to keep up its production of nuclear-powered Virginia-class submarines, which are key to deterring China. Australia 330. The Navy needs more Virginia-class subs, but shipyards cannot build enough. There are only 2 shipyards that build 1.2 boats per year. Virginias are a generation ahead in noise reduction, propulsion, weapon systems, and other areas. Congress is short by $2 billion. Affirming solves its first production of Virginia subs, Shelbourne 23. The Pentagon needs dedicated production of nuclear-powered submarines. It will require significant investment for Virginia-class task boats. AUKUS cohesion depends on U.S. capacity to sell Australia Virginia-class subs, Shelbourne 23. AUKUS, the tax sharing agreement, includes the U.S. selling Australia Virginia-class boats. If we hope to realize the full potential of AUKUS, it is imperative to meet Australian needs. AUKUS's credibility is key to deterring Chinese aggression, Grossman 23. Virginia-class subs deepen security collaboration aimed at countering China. AUKUS is unique because of its exclusive focus on modernizing to deter China. AUKUS is controversial. All nations are attempting to stay out of competition, and AUKUS is sewage probe concerns viewed as a legitimate counter to Chinese military. Great power war causes extinction, Claire 23. A great power war, accidents or misunderstandings could escalate. Tensions cause leaders to fight then negotiate. Nukes could be used with a famine caused by winter extinction. Cool.
I will send the doc, and then I'll be ready to go. My name is Oliver Alphenis. I'll be the first speaker for the negative from Nueva. Once everybody gets it, just let me know and I'll start.
Alright, I got it.
This is good? Perfect. We negate. Contention 1 is a trade-off. The renewable energy market is strong despite Trump. Copley 25. Despite Trump's attacks on renewables, the clean energy industry is on pace for record growth. The build-out of big solar hit an all-time high in 2025. Wind projects jumped 93%, and electricity demand is surging. Renewable energy is quick to build and provide electricity that's cheap. Trump tried to withhold federal funding in order for the government to stop issuing leases, but demands for clean energy is not going away. Corporations like Amazon, Meta, and Google are signing contracts to buy increasing renewable energy. It is the cheapest option. Investing in nuclear energy would crowd out better renewable options. Lovins 21. Renewables swell, supplying displaced carbon as much as 38 times what nuclear did. Nuclear hogs market space, jams grid capacity, and diverts investments that carbon-free competitors can't contest. The more urgent climate change is, we must invest judiciously to buy cheap, fast, sure options instead of costly, slow, speculative ones. Nuclear energy will not save us from the climate crisis, but renewables will. That's better than their WNA evidence, which is an association for the nuclear industry, whereas our evidence is a Stanford professor, Jacobson 24. One nuclear plant takes 14 years to build. About 7.1 million people die from air pollution each year. Nuclear will result in 93 million people dying as we wait. Wind and solar farms take only 2. Long time lag between planning and operation to identify a site, obtain a permit, insurance, construction, a power purchase agreement, transmission, operating the license all takes 19 years or more. New reactor designs are untested. The reactor could fail, resulting in a disaster. Uranium mining causes lung cancer, and decay products are carcinogenic. The nuclear plant emits due to the continuous mining and refining of uranium. Emissions are, in addition, from the water vapor and heat they release. China's investment in nuclear plants resulted in CO2 emissions increasing rather than declining. We're going to mark the card there. It spills over. Holtman and Gross 21. Credible U.S. action can dampen or accelerate global action. Credible U.S. action is the basis for genuine leadership. It moves the U.S. toward a low-carbon economy. Leadership and innovation provides opportunities for international engagement. The U.S. must advance a credible strategy that is seen as reliable. Actions must take place at the federal level. U.S. global climate leadership is a possibility. U.S. action today is critical. Solving the climate change crisis is critical. Sears 21. Climate could become an existential threat as a hothouse Earth. While societies possess some adaptation, heat imposes physical limits. Indirect effects include sea levels, extreme disasters, pressures, scarcity, viruses, and migration. We'll mark the card there. Contention 2 is terror. New reactors will be built using HALEU. Robinson 24. HALEU is a nuclear fuel reactor fuel that can be employed in nuclear weapons. Historically, it is limited to research in small quantities. However, new advanced reactors are designed to run on HALEU. In the US, the DOE provides funds for more than 10 reactor concepts. A single reactor contains enough HALEU to make a nuclear weapon, but a lack of DOE funding is preventing its implementation. Geiger 25. Trump's frozen DOE activities. The freeze affects grants, loans, and studies, bringing the $50 billion budget to a standstill. Missions are on pause. The DOE is in limbo. But app funding allows HALEU reactors. The Chinky et al. 24. Successful deployment depends on production and supply chain management of HALEU. Modernizing current production facilities with new technologies will enhance efficiency. To balance the high cost of HALEU, economic incentives and support programs should be developed. That invites runaway terror and proliferation. Nuremberg 24. Were HALEU to become the standard reactor fuel, countries would be able to obtain, produce, and process weapons-usable HALEU with impunity. Only days from a bomb, giving the international community no warning of proliferation and no opportunity to prevent it. Today's commercial cannot sustain the explosive chain reaction, which has prevented terrorists from repurposing commercial fuel. Nuclear reactor designs today would use HALEU. Safeguards fail and reactors get exported. UCS 21. Any cycle that utilizes reprocessing possesses prolif and terror risks. It provides far greater opportunities for diversion or threats. Theft, safeguards, and security are costly and cumbersome. They cannot compensate for increased vulnerability. Using HALEU would increase risks. Cut the card there. Right-wing domestic terrorists are a unique nuclear terrorist. Ideology and attitude of federal proximity. Earnhardt 21. Far-right extremist terrorists represent a unique danger because of the prevalence in federal institutions. They may infiltrate nuclear facilities. Nuclear terrorism is amplified. Cut the card there. Even one attack escalates and it turns every impact. Umbrella and Bush for 18. Small bomb would cause unprecedented catastrophe. Consequences would propagate worldwide. Global distrust would spark tensions, lead to nuclear use, decrease in self-control, escalation, present conflicts, economic depression, and a decline in trade. Cool. You ready for cross?
Can I get a mark?
Sure.
And then we're good for cross after.
dissent. Since you spoke first, you can have the first question.
So why do renewables have to trade off with nuclear energy?
Yeah, our evidence gives a few reasons. The first, they occupy similar amounts of funds, they occupy similar space, they require similar labor forces, etc.
Wait, why does that mean that they're necessarily mutually exclusive? Even if they both have the same labor force, why wouldn't the government just hire more people to increase the amount of jobs that they have?
Because there's not enough people that can do these jobs. It also gives the examples of things like grid capacity and specific investments with money. The DOE does not have enough money to invest in all of these things at once. Our evidence indicates that current private sector investment in renewables and federal funding for that is incredibly effective. But I have a question.
Sure.
Let's talk about your scenario on submarines.
Yeah.
Your evidence identifies that we need more shipyards. Are shipyards considered nuclear energy?
It's part of domestic nuclear investment. Obviously, if we're going to be investing in things that the U.S. does build, i.e. the Navy being able to build things like nuclear-powered submarines in shipyards, we don't necessarily need to just invest in shipyards. We're going to be able to invest in the overall labor force that's required for us to be able to build those submarines more
Can I
effectively.
have a follow-up?
Sure.
Your evidence says that we do not have enough shipyards in the first place, which means even if we get more total laborers, we would not be able to build the nuclear submarines because we don't have the shipyards.
Not
Are
necessarily.
shipyards
The
a
only
type
reason
of
that we
nuclear energy?
What?
Are shipyards a type of nuclear
Yeah,
energy?
if we're going to be building these Virginia-class submarines, obviously FIAT would necessitate that we invest in building things like shipyards.
I don't think that that's what nuclear energy is, but you can have a question.
All right, sure. All right. Actually, let's go to this terror argument. Can you tell me why HALEU energy is uniquely worse?
Yeah, so HALEU is enriched between 5 and 20% rather than normal uranium enrichment for nuclear power, which is less than 5%. Once it is at this high enrichment level, terrorists are able to use it to more readily make a bomb because it is already close to the critical mass that causes the fission chain reaction. When we have uranium-235, that's far less stable than uranium-238, which is used more commonly in nuclear reactors. Because HALEU is smaller, it uses a more dangerous isotope of uranium. Terrorists can easily use that and repurpose it into a bomb.
Wait, none of this is true, actually. The U.S. already uses HU uranium reactors in the status quo, which all enrich their uranium to at least 20%. If that's the case, why haven't terrorists stolen nuclear, fissile material from those?
One, they don't generally. Most nuclear plants that we use for civilian usage are far below 5% even. The second issue is that the ones that you are identifying are probably things like military usage, etc., whereas we are identifying ones that are more easily accessible to government officials. Can I have a question?
Sure.
Okay, let's talk about your scenario on climate. When we saw a country like France invest more in nuclear energy, did that increase or decrease the pollution and climate change in the area?
I'm sure you can tell me. I'm not an expert on what France does all the time.
Yeah, it crowded out the renewables, and on net, they faced more deaths and more climate change in the area. But you can
Wait. There's a problem with renewables, though. Obviously, if we're going to have to keep on using them, it means that we have to keep on mining things like REMs to actually build them in the first place. That's definitely going to cause emissions, along with having to transport all those minerals along the supply chain.
Wait, we also have to mine uranium for your scenario, which
Yeah, we need much less uranium to power
attractive.
nuclear reactors, obviously meaning that overall there's less emissions in the mining process and the transporting process.
We would disagree with that.
We'll use some prep starting now.
Yes, 104.
Cool. And opening up the document. Alright, the order of my speech is just going to be top down there, guys. Is everyone good?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, I just received it. You should be ready to start.
Start on their C1. Firstly, we would say they don't have any uniqueness on climate change. Our evidence indicates that climate change has continually got worse. If their impacts were true and that renewables are so important, then they should be at least doing some mitigation. But insofar as it hasn't, it's try or die for us to solve climate change. With that, go to their C1 specifically. We would say their own argument makes trade-offs inevitable. They say declining government budgets. Flyer in 23 writes that huge state budgets is over. Budgets are getting tighter. Revenues are declining. Jurisdictions face enormous gaps. Federal efforts would be frustrated by declining investment, and we are likely to see severe fiscal crisis. They say that the government will still have some money, but if that's true, then we could just increase our deficit spending, which has happened every single time. We've raised the budget just this year to 37 trillion. Needham writes that Congress approved a massive budget that would boost spending over the next decade. The legislation eliminates budget ceilings and allows the fund to flow more freely. Now, let's go to their reasons as to why nuclear energy is bad. They say it takes too much time. Obviously, in the status quo, investment is not rapid, which is why it took so long. But even then, every single time we've invested in nuclear energy, we've always seen it develop from 25 years to build to 14 to now 10, which is evidence that nuclear energy is consistently getting better while renewables, on the other hand, are failing. But secondly, they say it'll also cause lung cancer, etc., and increase emissions. All of these are not unique to nuclear energy. It happens with renewables as well. To develop renewable technology, you need rare earth minerals, also definitely cause cancer in order to mine those in the first place. Now, let's go to trade-off. We would say that they don't have a specific threshold aside from vague statements about certain programs being on the chopping block. There's a reason why they haven't read a single piece of evidence from both the AF and renewables. You should hold the line against incomplete arguments. It's never happened in the past. And there's no trade-off. Fiat goes through the DOE, not through any other sector, which obviously increases investment. USA government writes that the DOE manages nuclear infrastructure and administers energy policy, which means that they'd always administer more funding. And lastly, we'd say renewables fail. Fossil fuel dependence and faulty infrastructure and supply chain issues. Reese writes that green energy advocates dismiss the evidence. Tech are fossil fuel dependent in mining and transportation. Infrastructure wears out and there are supply chain issues that electricity cannot substitute. If their arguments are true, then ours are true. And if we increase the investment, we're going to spur more economic growth, which definitely means we're going to better renewables in the long term. Go to their C2. Firstly, 2025, we will see global proliferation due to expiring agreements and Trump. They have no uniqueness on their scenario. Ours is from last month. Lawler writes that Trump's withdrawal of Kiev has Polish, French, South Korea exploring their options. The last arms agreement is less than a year from expiration, and Tehran and Pyongyang have made significant advancements. Then, skip the second card, but we would say that only the AF can solve. Firstly, new fuels and transportation methods solve. AC writes that reactors use fuel, not weapons-usable plutonium. That's not used for weapons without a reprocessing facility. Reactors are transported as a single unit, which means the country does not need knowledge. And you can turn it because new tech advancements reduce the proliferation risk. NIA writes that TRISO fuel is difficult to separate into its components. Advanced reactors eliminate the need for enrichment entirely. New monitoring tech increases the capabilities of national governments to detect the diversion of material, which means they're able to solve before terrorists get them. But thirdly, we would say the dominance in our production lets us control uranium exports and thus decrease the risk of proliferation. Nordquist writes that if the U.S. is concerned about partners to enrich their own fuel, the U.S. must be able to guarantee that fuel to foreign buyers. Nothing prevents China from transferring enrichment technology to Saudi. It would be more beneficial for the U.S. to keep the Saudis in its own sphere of influence than to push them into the arms of China. U.S. could take its current talent and expand it. Cut the evidence and expand it. The last argument I'm going to make is look at their impact. It's about domestic terrorism. If their argument is true about exporting nuclear energy, why would this matter?
Okay. I think I'm good. Wait, actually, can you say the marks?
Yeah. I just sent them one.
Okay. I'll
Let
let
me
you
know
know.
when you get it. We got it. Should we start then?
Oh yeah, she was cool.
That was 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll send it off. One more.
Alright, that's fine.
Okay, on the side, I'm gonna mix that. Did everyone get it wrong?
I got it.
The order of my speech is just going to go on the negative case and then on the affirmative case. Maggie, are you good? Come on, are you good? Are my opponents ready?
1 second. Yeah, I'm good.
Great, then time will start on my first word. Start on our first argument about renewables. Their first piece of evidence about trade-offs being inevitable is not specific to the energy sector and is also from 2023 and not implicated. Don't let them get away with this. But then, they tell you that we will be able to have deficit spending. That's not what our warrant is. Our warrant is because of labor. The people who are able to work as professionals in the nuclear industry are the same as people who are working on developing in the renewables industry. None of their responses interact with our labor claims. But our other warrant is also that if nuclear energy is popularized, there's a shift in investment towards that and away from renewables, even though nuclear energy is worse in the short term. They tell you that there's no threshold to trade-off, but we would tell you that Trump has literally been cutting so much spending and that we have limited labor, and our evidence is all specific that people will shift to prioritizing nuclear energy and not on renewables. They tell you fiat goes to the Department of Energy, renewables are a form of energy. Then they tell you that renewables fail because we have to mine, but they've considered that you also have to mine uranium, which we would say is equally bad. And we would tell you that emissions increase when you have nuclear energy. Empirics prove Jacobson 24, there's no such thing as a close to zero emission plant. Even existing plants emit due to the continuous mining and refining of uranium. China's investment in nuclear plants instead of wind or solar resulted in CO2 emissions increasing 1.3% rather than declining. You can always prefer our empirics here. But then they tell you that it's not unique to nuclear energy. We would say in the short term, when you invest in nuclear energy, a sudden surge in climate emissions is worse. They tell you the climate is already declining. If the next 20 years are key, then we shouldn't have a sudden surge right now. But then go to our second argument on HALEU. First, they tell you that prolif is inevitable. Our argument is not about proliferation. It is about nuclear terrorism happening in the United States. Then they tell you that new fuels solve. Group these responses. They're about plutonium and triso, but they've conceded our very specific evidence that the United States has wanted to use HALEU specifically in reactors for years, and the only reason we weren't able to implement it is because spending is cut. They themselves told you that they'll fiat spending increasing, which means HALEU is the most likely implementation. And they've also conceded that HALEU is a category 2 fuel, which means it has lower security on it while simultaneously being a higher enriched form of uranium that can be used to make bombs. But then they tell you that experts will control the risk of prolif. Our argument is still not about proliferation. Yes, that's one scenario. What we're going for is the Nuremberg evidence that tells you that terrorists will be able to access it in plants because it's deregulated, and as HALEU is transported and moved around, terrorists can get there, and because terrorists are corrupt and often work in nuclear plants. They tell you that they just tell you that domestic and proliferation aren't the same. We're not saying they're the same. We're saying that uniquely right now, domestic terror pressures are high because of Trump. But then Go to their case on climate first. They don't actually read evidence saying that nuclear energy is key. They just say that climate happens and climate will cause extinction. But then also, even if we cut all of US emissions, other countries will still emit and the world will grow even hotter. Renewables are easier to build for other countries and more exportable. That's what our evidence indicates. So nuclear energy doesn't spill over, but the status quo does. And plants take way too long to build. Jacobson 24, the time between planning and operation of a reactor includes identifying a site, leasing land, obtaining financing, and insurance for installing transmission, negotiate a power purchase agreement, obtain permits, cut the card there. They just tell you that if we have investment, we'll solve. No, that doesn't make it faster. But then on their econ argument, it's non-unique because investment is high right now. ANS 24, Amazon deploys 5 gigawatts of nuclear energy, backing $500 million, and SMRs comes on the heels of partnership structure between Microsoft. Cut the card there. Then go to submarines. 1, we would tell you that Trump already wants to invest in nuclear energy. Mr. 25, nuclear energy will be accelerated by backing Trump. Trump is interested in backing technology. But then there's Shellmore evidence is about a shipyard that needs more resources, not nuclear energy. Therefore, even if we invest in nuclear energy, we won't have the shipyards to build in. But then it's also non-unique because deterrence for, or cut that card, turn it, because de-escalation is false hope and concessions for more violence, quote 24, or cut that card. Deterrence fails because China is defensive. ICG 23, peaceful unification remains Beijing's preference. China remains confident with time and a power shift. Compatriots will come around, force deterring Taiwan from moving towards independence, and how Washington engages may increase the risk of miscalc. Beijing will not attack because it has the ability to do so, nor hold back if Taiwan is pressing red lines. So investing more in submarines doesn't actually deter China, it just provokes them. Okay, I'll send a mark.
Okay. No, like it updated to this past. Say yes, updating. Actually, while you're doing the mark, we'll take some prep.
Okay, Mark just sent.
Alright, that was 122.
And you if you cross.
Yeah.
You want to sit or stand?
I prefer standing, but I don't really care.
That's fine.
Alright. Can I get the first question?
Sure.
Alright, let's go to domestic terrorism. You tell me that there are high risks right now. We've invested over $20 million into the HALEU program. Why didn't terrorists take it then?
We would tell you that HALEU hasn't been able to be massively produced in reactors. Currently, all of the reactors use low enriched uranium, which is sub 5%. Even if we've invested that money into trying to build HALEU, currently our HALEU, the amount of HALEU we have is still pretty small, which is why it hasn't been mass implemented. Once you fiat investment, that means it is mass implemented, and we would tell you that once it's at that 20% enrichment mark, which is what HALEU is at, when you enrich uranium, it gets exponentially easier once you hit that 20% mark, which means terrorists can use it to make bombs. That's our Nuremberg evidence.
Wait.
Can I take a question?
Real quick, you tell me that terrorists are going to take any opportunity they have to get nuclear weapons, and then
Yeah.
you tell me that they've had a $20 million investment to allow them to have that opportunity, which already should have triggered, and yet you tell me they haven't done anything with it?
Yeah, because $20 million is actually not that much, and you can't name for me any reactors that are currently using HALEU because they're not using it. The $20 million is just to start procuring HALEU, not to actually implement it into reactors. And we would tell you that terrorists have tried to attack plants before, such as in Florida in 2018, but it wasn't successful because low enriched uranium can't be used to make bombs.
Alright,
Can I
that's
take a
fine.
question?
Yeah, you can take one.
Cool. Let's talk about your argument on climate.
Yeah.
Why Okay, like, how long does a nuclear plant take to build?
We would say we've developed it to the point where we can cut it down to 10 years.
We can cut it down to 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
Okay, cool.
It takes 10 years for a nuclear reactor to be built.
Okay, it takes 10 years for a nuclear reactor to be built. What happens during those 10 years?
During those 10 years, we see rapid investment and we see much more development in renewable energy. You have conceded the turn that I made that cross applies our case, and that when we fiat more investment into the energy sector as a whole, we decommission it away from oil, which is why, even if your argument is true and that renewables are getting invested, we would say we fiat more investment
Wait,
as a whole.
you're investing in nuclear energy. So my question is, during those 10 years, are we mining?
Yeah.
Cool. Doesn't that increase emissions in those first 10 years? Yes, maybe when the plant is built, after a decade, you'll have reduction emissions. In the first 10 years, are you mining uranium?
I mean, I would say this entire argument is non-unique. We're mining right now for rare earth minerals for renewable.
But you told me the next 20 years are key, so a dramatic increase in mining uranium, which you've conceded empirically increased greenhouse gases by 1.3%. Wouldn't that be bad if the next 20 years are key for us to skyrocket our emissions before we can?
Not if we're literally doing the exact same thing for renewable
but we're not
energy.
doing the exact same thing right now.
We have to. You've conceded that we need
You haven't quantified for me what the emissions from renewables are, but you can take the question.
We have. It's the exact same because it requires the same similar type of material,
i.e.
i.e.
send
rare
me
earth
the card
minerals.
with the statistic after, but you can take the question.
Alright, sure. Let's go to... Actually, yeah, let's go to your argument on trade-offs, right?
Sure.
So, you tell me that labor is going to trade off.
Yeah.
But why do we have to, or why is it specifically that only experts in nuclear industry are the ones that are good for
We're just talking
renewable
about
energy?
people working in the energy industry and people who are working in mining and plant building as well. It's the same group of construction laborers. And
So
we
it's
don't
about
have-
construction
actually,
laborers being the same.
There's two responses. It's about the construction laborers being the same. It's also about scientists being the same. You didn't actually respond to either of those.
Why are
You just
scientists
said
the
that there would
same?
be a budget trade-off because it's all in the energy industry. That's what our evidence indicates. But you conceded our other warrant, which is that when we have a perceptual shift towards nuclear energy, everyone goes, oh, nuclear energy is the hot new thing. Let me invest in that, and they sacrifice the benefits that renewables have been giving them.
We would say they'd probably sacrifice oil instead and decommission away from that, but that's cross. Alright, we'll take more prep study now. Alright, that was 37 seconds. In total, we've used... Oh, yeah, actually, that's okay.
Well, there's just going to be the and then the neg. Is everyone good? You should be voting on the economy. They fully conceded that our recession is inevitable because of global stagflation from Trump's tariffs. That definitely means it's try or die for us, because if a recession happens, it means that they're not going to be able to solve for things like renewables, because if the economy is bad, obviously no one's going to be able to invest in them in the first place. Remember that? They've also fully conceded the link. Affirming solves because whenever the public sector invests in nuclear energy, it spurs investment from the private sector. That's uniquely important because it means that whenever the US is able to build nuclear reactors, we're able to export those reactors to other countries. That should also respond to any of their arguments about like other countries not being able to build things like nuclear reactors because they don't have to incur the cost since the US is going to be exporting them relatively cheaply. That's also important because it fosters economic resilience. You've conceded in a period that in the EU, whenever they've invested for every €1 they've invested into nuclear energy, it's produced a €4 return on investment for that GDP. That should definitely frame your ballot because it means that affirming is the only way to solve any of their arguments. But then, they say that there's already private sector investment in SMRs. Their evidence literally only lists what Amazon is doing. Insofar as you can see that there's not broader investment in nuclear energy, it definitely means that affirming is necessary, and it also means that you just fully consider our uniqueness. But then, you also say the argument always on time frame. A recession is definitely going to happen within the next year, insofar as global stagflation is increasing, and insofar as stocks are also getting worse. They haven't told you how long it takes for the trade-off from renewables to nuclear energy happens, or how long it takes terrorists to get nukes. But then, on trade-off really quickly. They just fully conceded a couple things. First, you can see that the climate change is already getting worse. Obviously, if climate change is getting worse, that means an increase in renewables right now is not doing anything. That also means the app is try or die. And you've also conceded the runes analysis from the rebuttal. You've conceded that renewables are all net worse because they are dependent on things like oil in order to actually get these supply chains started and to transport these materials to other countries. That's uniquely bad because it means that it overall increases emissions. And you've also conceded that things like REMs end up getting mined which overall have caused more emissions. You should prefer our W and A evidence because it does the only comparative. Obviously, uranium is more energy dense, meaning that you have to mine less uranium overall to produce the same amount of energy. That also means that it's more energy. Efficient. You've also conceded that it only produces 12 grams of CO2 per kilowatt-hour. This means that our link on climate functions as a massive trend to the renewables argument. But then let's go to prolific really quickly. On this terror argument. A couple things you've conceded. First, you've conceded the NIA evidence. This evidence is really good because it identifies that whenever we generally invest in nuclear reactors, it means that the government is able to create more diversion detection technology. That should definitely be terminal defense to their argument because it means the government's going to be able to tell whether or not domestic terrorists are actually taking this fissile material. They're going to be able to tell if this fissile material is being taken. They're going to be able to hunt down the perpetrators and stop terrorism from actually causing any nuclear strike in the first place. But even then, Bruno also does really good analysis. If you can see that proliferation is happening now, that should definitely control their internal link because if there's more proliferation, it means that there's more incentive for terrorists to continue getting nuclear weapons. You've also conceded that the affirmative is the only way to solve because whenever the U.S. controls the export of uranium to other countries, it's able to control the risk of proliferation because the other countries are dependent on the U.S. for hallyu uranium. This definitely controls all their internal link. That controls their internal link and outweighs scope because if terrorists aren't able to get the fissile material in the first place, obviously there's not going to be any terrorism anywhere.
Okay, we're gonna take some credit.
We took 30, we took 31.
Yeah.
That was 125, so plus 30, we have 35. Or sorry, we have
Wait, sorry, how much left?
A minute 5.
The order is going to be starting briefly on this trade-off argument. I'm going to go on our argument about terrorism, do the comparative, and then go over their arguments about the economy. Are both of my judges ready? Perfect. Neither team is really going for this trade-off argument, but in the last speech, they keep trying to extend this argument that nuclear power is far more effective. Remember that their evidence is from the WNA, which is a nuclear organization, whereas our professors do the comparative and tell you that historically, when France and China have increased nuclear production, it increased emissions 1.3%. Inevitably, renewables are far easier to export and will be able to solve that far better than nuclear power. But the best argument to vote on in this round is our argument about nuclear terror. Currently, if the US will build more nuclear reactors, it's set to do so using HALEU, which is a compound enriched between 5 and 20% uranium, rather than normal reactors which are enriched below 5%. The DOE doesn't currently have the funding to do so, but if they get the funding, they will increase HALEU reactors, which allows people like terrorists to go in and infiltrate them and quickly make a bomb because it's already enriched to the amount that could allow them to make one. Currently, we see terrorists have ties to things like police organizations within the US, which would allow them to easily access one. If we see a nuclear terror attack in the US, that causes mass distrust worldwide, which can spiral into conflict. They've conceded most of this scenario. They tell you that their NIA evidence says there would be increased restrictions, but Command F hail you in the evidence. It is nowhere there, and it does not account for these new reactors. They're talking about other types of reactors that could potentially be built, but could is not will, and our evidence indicates that HALEU is the only one that actually will get built. Then, they give you all of these answers about proliferation, but this is not our argument. They have not identified a group in any of these countries that would be able to build the nuclear weapons or do the terrorism. We are the only side that does so. It is the US and domestic terrorist organizations that would. In other countries, we haven't seen them build nuclear weapons yet. We don't think it's going to happen. But in the US, we know terrorists have incentives to build them. The only thing that is lacking is capability, which happens once they get HALEU. They tell you that, like, we're not, or they give you this scenario about exporting to others. It's not about exporting. It is about having access within the US. Then I'm going to do the weighing here. The first thing is time frame. They've conceded that nuclear power takes at least 10 years to build, whereas the mining itself of the uranium and the transport of HALEU would allow terrorists to access it and proliferate worldwide. The second thing is magnitude. Theirs is just a small-scale recession, whereas ours is global war, which should be prioritized in your impact calculus. Let's go to their case. First, remember that renewables only take 2 years to build and nuclear takes 10 years, which means the overall labor and investment takes far longer for nuclear than it does for renewables. If the two do trade off, that just means that the labor force is going to shift and we won't see any difference in the economy. But then, they have conceded that other companies are already doing it. They tell you it's small scale. No, it's $500 million of investment into nuclear power and companies are poised to do more. It should have been reverting the economic crisis. But then remember that if we see things like terrorism happen, that's going to decrease the US's perceptual standing, which is also going to hurt it. It's just so clear for the now. Sure.
We'll start. What incentives do terrorists have to use nuclear weapons?
Our evidence indicates that they have doomsday, apocalyptic, and accelerationist incentives that tell them that they want to accelerate the end of the US or the end of the world because of certain political motives.
Wait, what kind of terrorists is your evidence talking about? Because you say things like right-wing terrorists, right?
Far-right terrorists, yeah.
Wait, so why wouldn't Trump being elected mean that these terrorists are mostly evaded?
That's not necessarily our argument. One, we would say right-wing terrorists are pretty crazy and we still have a reason to attack the US, or to try to attack targeted communities of color in the US, that's their September 21 evidence, or that these right-wing terrorists would want to attack other countries. Like right-wing terrorists aren't particularly fond of Mexico, and that's who's right next door. So if they thought, yes, I can make a bomb, which is pretty common rhetoric in right-wing terrorist bases, if they want to make a bomb and have that level of control and destruction, we're saying they would either target other countries, which spirals into global nuclear war, or that they target communities of color within the US. But can we take the question?
Sure.
Cool. If companies are already investing, what's the threshold for investment that we need to stop a recession? Given that you told me that Trump's tariffs are pretty crazy, it's 47%.
Your evidence cites one company investing, which is Amazon, and your evidence also says they only have 5 megawatts of capacity for themselves.
Wait, that's not my question. I asked about the threshold.
Again, I'm saying that the threshold is the F because we need to serve broader
How much money
private
is
investment.
that?
Getting most of the private sector.
I mean,
I
obviously,
can't give you an exact number for how every single dollar and cent we need to end up making the economy better. But our evidence is pretty specific insofar as we're able to foster economic resilience against things like oil and gas prices, while also being able to
foster economic resilience.
Yeah.
Wait, here's the thing.
How long does it take to foster economic resilience? Do the reactors have to be built, or is it just perceptual?
No, it's perceptual because our argument is that when we increase private investment, then we can have economic resilience. And also, obviously, we can't tell you the exact amount of dollars necessary to make Trump save America or stop economic downturn. But our argument is that a substantial investment would probably procure private investment and definitely solve economic resilience worldwide.
Wait, but if I've just concepted the nuclear reactor, how do I know that energy will protect me in oil and gas prices? You've already conceded it takes 10 years for us to actually access the energy from nuclear plants. So if I'm an investor, right, and I'm oh, there will be nuclear energy, but there's an oil crisis right now, why wouldn't I still freak out?
Wait. When have you made any analysis on an oil crisis before Grand Cross?
We've been making the response that nuclear energy takes way too long to build, so the resilience and the investment that you claim will happen won't actually trigger in time to stop the recession. That's a response we've made since rebuttal.
You've also conceded that if an oil crisis is likely, it's likely because of renewable energy that already should have happened, which means that any of this analysis is definitely brand new.
That was not in extension.
And none of this was in summary or rebuttal.
Yes, it was. I made the argument.
Alright, let's go to Yeah, let's go to your argument on trade-off.
Yeah.
All right. So, are renewables effective at solving emissions?
Yes.
Which evidence have you indicated that renewables are effective?
Here, I can pull it up.
Like, I just want the
More
name.
specific, what evidence do you have that renewables are causing a
Yeah,
decline in
it's
climate emissions?
the Jacobson 24 evidence.
Jacobson
Wait,
lists a laundry
Jacobson
list of
just said-
issues as to why nuclear energy fails. Not once does it mention the word renewables being better.
Wait, is it?
And- sorry,
Jacobson
Also
doesn't say
consider the
anything about
response of the
renewable
whole
energy being able to
21
solve
evidence.
climate change.
Wait,
We're way
that's
over.
because we're saying that we would
Yeah.
That's
That's fine. Alright, I don't have any prep left. The order of my speech is just going to be the aft case and the neck case. Alright. The cleanest place for you to vote in this round is our argument on recession. Remember that recession is inevitable by this year because of Trump's tariffs and low investment in stocks from private investment. But affirming would rapidly increase private investment since it shifts into nuclear energy, which indicates that now it's a low risk issue for private investment, which means investors that have not invested into the economy before are likely to invest now. That was fully conceded out of the rebuttal. Their only response is that it takes too long. One, they have not contextualized this to our link about investment. Even if it takes too long to create nuclear reactors, it just requires the initial investment to happen. But secondly, they have also conceded that every single time we've increased investment, it has advanced nuclear technology, which is why we've cut down from 25 to 14 to 10 years now, which all indicates that more investment in nuclear technology is good. The only other response is that we've had $500 million. I urge you to look at the evidence. It's about one company, Amazon, that have had 5 kilowatts of power for their nuclear energy, but not a broad indicative of how the economy is doing as a whole or investment there. Our argument is very simple. When we have broad economic spillover, it also goes international since we export this nuclear energy to other countries and thus save a global recession that pushes 96 million people into poverty. Remember, all of this analysis is conceded, and they've conceded that every single time we've increased our investment in nuclear technology to return GDP 4 times. That's for the W&A evidence. Literally every part of this argument is conceded, and they've conceded it's definitely global and it's inevitable. It should frame both your time frame analysis and also frame the global spillover. Now, let's go to their case. A couple key issues here. Firstly, I ask you to think about this scenario. They say right-wing terrorists are crazy, are going to attack out of nowhere. And they have not made any analysis as to what Trump has to do with that. Secondly, they've conceded the NIA evidence that says we're going to reduce the risk of proliferation because every single time we've increased diversion technology and prevented it from happening, which is why $16 million didn't trigger it.
Cool.
We have a minute and 5 minutes. Cool. The order of my speech is going to be terror, doing comparative, and then economy. Are my judges ready? Are my opponents ready?
Yeah.
Great. Then time will start on my first word. The cleanest place to vote in this round is on terror. Remember, the DOE is poised to use helium in the reactors. That is 20% enrichment, which they've conceded means that terrorists are able to make a bomb out of it. But helium is deregulated. It's a category 2 fuel, which means that it doesn't have the same safeguards and people are able to steal it and actually make it into weapons, and that police and workers in plants want to make it into weapons. If right-wing terrorists gain access to helium, they are able to make nukes which can escalate into war as they attack other communities and other countries. All of their responses are both new and over time, but I'll frontline them anyway. They tell you that there's no reason terrorists would attack under Trump, but we've indicated that it's within terrorist ideology to try to rewrite the world. That's why our evidence is about Nazis talking about it in right-wing countries who still wanted to attack, and they would attack communities of color or neighboring countries because they view those communities as problems. But then they try to increase regulations, but remember, none of their evidence is about HALEU, and they've conceded that HALEU's security classification is wrong and it's not going to be changed, which is why it'll be underregulated. I'll do the comparative here. First is on time frame. It takes 10 years for their impacts to trigger and for resilience to actually happen because the plants take that long to build, but HALEU gets mined and transported immediately, which means terrorists can build a bomb literally within weeks. But they also conceded a short circuit. If the United States even has attempted terror of people trying to attack these bombs, it decks investor confidence and decks global confidence because the United States looks like we're not strong, which short circuits their economic impact. But I'll go to their econ argument here. First, they've conceded companies are already investing and they can't give you a threshold for investment. But second, they've conceded that if there is a trade-off, investment just shifts. It doesn't actually increase. But then third, they've conceded that it takes so long to build and for a time frame to actually trigger, and in that time, millions will already be dead from terrorism. They've done no weighing in the last speech. You have to negate. Good night, guys. And thank you.
Thank you so much.